Now, as a direct result of the novel COVID-19 pandemic, South Africans have had to make numerous changes to their lifestyles, from how to worship right down to the way that the bereaved bury their loved ones. There has also been some reports from the Eastern Cape where some family members exhumed their relatives who died from COVID-19 in order to perform the burial rites, which of course they were not able to do because of the presence of the virus in the body. For a reaction on this, I'm joined now by Mr. Zolani Mkiva from the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa. He is the General Secretary. Baba Mkiva, thank you so much for your time today. Now, this is a very serious situation where families are in a position where they can no longer do the various traditional rites that they would ordinarily have done on their loved ones who have passed away due to COVID-19. Talk us through the specifics of what exactly these rituals are that many families are now finding they can no longer perform.
Well, I think in the main, when a person passes away in our society, people would slaughter in order to appease the ancestors and in order to accompany the deceased in a proper manner, in a manner that pays the last respect in accordance with our tradition. But what has brought about a problem this time around is the fact that the bodies have to be wrapped around with plastic. And our people do not like that. They have never even liked it. Even when a coffin is laced with plastic, they always remove the plastic because plastic is associated with suffocation and so on and so forth. And many of our people have then decided on their own, without any consultation with authorities, including traditional authorities. They just go back to exhume the bodies because somebody in the family has dreamt that the body of the deceased under the soil cannot make them to have comfort and peace as a family, and therefore they decided to do that. It is something that is unheard of, particularly at this time when we have this serious variant which is killing our people in great numbers. So we want to make an appeal to say that it mustn't be done. But I must say that our funerals generally, even before the outbreak of the coronavirus, the celebratory part of it was not necessarily based on the African culture. That kind of opulence which our people were showing in funerals is not necessarily how this thing has been done originally. It has been influenced mainly by coloniality and Western culture, because we never had coffins to start with before colonialists came here. We simply used hides and skins to wrap the bodies around, and then we bury it into the soil. But because something has happened over a long period of time, which is more than 100 years, it gets to a point where it becomes socially acceptable. And when then it gets changed, particularly when a change happens so sudden as a result of the outbreak, then it doesn't sink well and it doesn't sink quickly to many of our people. And I think it is as a result of that you find our people to question a number of things that are happening now. But I speak from a position of authority as delegated by the Congress of Traditional Leaders, that people mustn't exhume their bodies without any authorization. In fact, it is totally not advisable that, given that we have a new wave, that people would exhume bodies at this time, because they will create even major problems for us. We might just have another variant which comes as a result of these exhumations, because we don't know what will happen after the body gets exhumed. It may contaminate, and it may have come across other chemicals that may be there underneath the soil. So we are advising our people to be patient and to exercise restraint and to do away with anything that suggest that they must exhume their beloved ones. You don't do that, it is not acceptable.
Dr. Mkiva, you talk about the practicalities as well as the health dangers that exhuming the dead could possibly have. But there are also the really real spiritual, psychological, emotional practicalities that perhaps ought to be considered in this particular instance. In what ways can families still do what they are supposed to do in order to perhaps fulfill whatever spiritual practices need to be fulfilled without necessarily breaking the law and without necessarily exhuming bodies? For example, there's so many people who are not able now to wash the bodies of their loved ones. And that also for many is a point or ritual of closure for them. What do you, as Contra Lesser, advise?
Our advice is very simple, is that let's abide by what we are told to do at this point. Let's postpone anything that is postponable, including those rites. If there is a spiritual exercise that needs to be conducted, which requires us to interact and converse with the bodies or the spirit of those that have departed, let's do that at a time when we have defeated the current enemy before us. In a state of war, even though we are Africans, we behave like other societies behave. We focus our attention into confronting the enemy before us. We can't have a luxury of doing things in the manner that we did when the situation was normal. People must understand that we are in an abnormal environment, and as such, let's accept the fact that we still have an ability to bury our own without necessarily going step by step in terms of all the ritual that and traditions that we're supposed to do. What is comforting is that we will have an opportunity to do all of those once we have completely defeated the enemy. And it has always happened in history, it has always happened in the past, that when one of our forefathers had fallen and we could not know where he died, we could still go on a search and trace. When we find him, we will then go through a process, which is spiritual, a spiritual journey of repatriating the body from where it was laid to the place that is supposed to be the official place of the resting of that particular ancestor. So I'm saying that our people must understand it is not for the first time that as Africans in the Southern Africa, we are confronted with a virus and an enemy of this magnitude. We have had the Renderpest in the past. We had had the lung disease, which happened in the past. We had to behave in the manner in which we are behaving now. So maximum discipline is very key. Maximum discipline is very key during this state of affairs. We are a custodian ourselves of our traditions and culture. We are making an appeal to our people that we can postpone these things. We are not canceling them. We are simply shifting them to a later date, a date wherein it would even be feasible to do it, wherein all our relatives will be able to observe those protocols and rituals.
I'm quite interested in your perspective regarding what I'm about to ask you here. You know, rituals and practices are often determined as well by the geographical and socio-economic circumstances that they are practiced in. In a situation like this, is one then not able to somehow adapt whatever rituals needed to be done and adapt them in such a way that you can still fulfill the principle behind why that particular cleansing or ritual or a crossing over process was put in place, and yet adapt it so that it suits the moment and it suits the times and it suits the era that we are in? Is that something that's doable?
There's a great amount of flexibility in our culture and in our conducting of these rituals. So it is something that can be done, and it has always been done like that. Look, my sister, we go in front of the cross, we speak to the ancestors, we offer our apologies and regrets wherein certain things were not done in a particular way because of a current situation or the current context. And therefore, at any given time, our culture is not stubborn. Our culture is not rigid. Our culture is based on the values of Ubuntu. It doesn't mean that you must force matters when the situation doesn't allow. We can still resolve that by conversing with our ancestors, by conversing with the Most High, our God, Ukamata. So all I am saying, you have hit the nail on the head, actually. That's how it's supposed to happen. If we can't do certain things now, we can always do them later, but we can go back and take certain steps to sort of correct what we did not do right at a particular time because of conditions that were prevailing. And then we can then do that self-correction by going back to those steps and do step A until step Z. Then in that way, we are surely to settle the matters and ensure that those of us who have departed will rest in peace indeed, because it is something that we ought to do. I mean, many people are saying that the country in itself, with all some of the problems that it has, is that there are certain rituals which we have not done after we achieved our own freedom, of which we agree as the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa. But it doesn't mean that we cannot carry on with our lives. We are in a process of engaging. We're engaging with authorities to say, these are some of the things that we ought to do in order for us to achieve stability and the unity of purpose that we need as a country. So I'm saying, in the same context, we have to provide leadership and say to our people, we're in a state of war, and when there's a tug of war, you can't behave as normal. You ought to consider the abnormality that is happening currently as a result of the outbreak of the virus. And as such, we need adjustments and readjustments. We need to review certain things on how we do them. But the good thing is that once we have defeated the enemy, we'll go back and correct all of those matters and ensure that we leave no stone unturned in terms of actual ensuring that there's closure for all our families insofar as that is concerned. But digging and exhuming bodies at this time, it is just going to kill as many people as possible. And it is for that reason that as Contra Lesa, we appeal to our people that they mustn't do this, because some people go behind our backs. Some people do these things at night to avoid the issues of application and the processing of all those applications by authorities. So they prefer to take a short route to simply exhume without anybody knowing. But we know, even if they do it in darkness, but when they get sick, the whole community will know, and the whole community will be infected, and the whole community will be affected. And this will spiral this thing across the nation. And therefore, we really wish to make a humble appeal to our people to sort of exercise absolute restraint, and because it will be tantamount to disobedience to continue to do the exhumations without authorization.
Dr. Zolani Mkiva, thank you so much for your insight today, as well as the message coming from Contra Lesa. By no means should bodies be exhumed. It is a health hazard, not only to yourselves as families, but also to the communities at large. Thank you very much for joining us today. And also, I think what really came out of that conversation is, irrespective of what your traditional, spiritual or religious beliefs are, spiritual practices are also very much determined by what is permissible, what is doable at a particular time and place. And ultimately, it is always the principle underlying the ritual that ought to be focused on. And in that way, you are able then to adapt, be able to have your goodbyes, to say your goodbyes in a way that will bring the family peace, and that will also usher the loved one who is now deceased on their way forward.